Commander Jake Sullivan walked through the long metal hallway deep inside Luna Station, and his boots made soft clicking sounds on the polished floor as he moved toward the most important room in human space, where the future of his entire species waited behind thick steel doors that had taken 5 years just to build and install properly. The railgun stretched out before him like a sleeping giant made of copper coils and magnetic field generators that hummed with barely contained power. And Jake could feel the vibration in his chest as the massive weapon prepared for its first real test after 12 years of planning and building and testing smaller versions that could barely scratch the paint off an old cargo ship, Katie Morrison looked up from her control panel where dozens of green and yellow lights blinked in patterns that only she truly understood after spending 8 years learning every bolt and wire in the electromagnetic acceleration system that would either make humanity a force to respect in the galaxy or prove once again that humans were just another weak species playing with toys they barely understood. The observation screens showed empty space around the target zone, but Jake knew better because his sensors had detected at least 15 alien ships hiding behind cloaked fields and energy barriers as they watched and waited to see what the primitive humans would do with their latest kinetic weapon that the Galactic Council had already classified as barely more dangerous than throwing rocks really hard. Or Alex Chen stood near the massive capacitor banks that could store enough electrical energy to power a small city for 3 months, and all of that power would be released in less than 2 seconds to accelerate a simple tungsten rod to speeds that most alien civilizations thought were impossible for solid matter to achieve without breaking apart into subatomic particles. The Zilani Empire had been watching humans for 50 years, ever since the first human ship accidentally discovered their trade routes and stumbled into galactic politics like a child wandering into a room full of adults discussing serious business and the crystalline beings with their energy weapons. And plasma shields considered humans to be an amusing curiosity that might someday evolve into something worth talking to. Above Luna Station, in the cold vacuum of space alien sensors, recorded every detail of human activity while their crews made jokes about the latest primitive experiment and placed bets on whether the human projectile would even leave their solar system before burning up from atmospheric friction or magnetic field interference. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez checked her calculations for the 100th time, because the mathematics had to be perfect when dealing with relativistic physics, and even a tiny error in the magnetic field alignment could send their test projectile spinning off into deep space where it would become just another piece of debris floating between the stars. The Thurak Confederation maintained 3 heavy cruisers at what they considered a safe distance of 50,000 kilometers because their military doctrine taught that kinetic weapons were short-range affairs that posed no threat to properly armored starships, and their warrior culture viewed human attempts at advanced weaponry as pathetic efforts by a species that had not yet learned to properly fight. Dr. Amy Foster monitored Alien communications from her linguistics station, where she listened to dozens of different species discussing the upcoming human test in languages that had no words for the concepts that humanity was about to demonstrate, and she could hear the amusement in their translated voices as they prepared to watch another failed human experiment. The Railgun project had consumed the entire defense budget for 3 years running, and Jake knew that politicians back on Earth were waiting for results that would justify the massive expense of building a weapon that existed only in theory until today, when they would either prove that human engineering could compete with alien technology or confirm that humanity would remain a minor player in Galactic Affairs, Captain Lisa Park watched the alien fleet positions on her tactical display and counted at least 12 different species represented in the observation group, including some that had never shown interest in human activities before, and their sudden attention suggested that someone in the galactic intelligence community had heard rumors about what the Railgun project might be capable of achieving. The tungsten projectile sat in its firing chamber like a bullet, waiting for the trigger pull, and the simple metal rod weighed exactly 50 kilograms and measured 2 meters long and 6 centimeters wide, and contained no explosive warheads or energy weapons or exotic matter, because human engineers had learned that sometimes the most devastating weapons were also the most elegantly simple. Katie Morrison ran through her final checklist while the magnetic coils charged to maximum power, and she could feel the station's structure vibrating as enormous electrical currents flowed through superconducting cables that had cost more than most starships and required cooling systems that operated at temperatures close to absolute zero. The Corvin Republic had sent a single scout ship to observe the test, and their oppressed people had been conquered by the Thurak 3 centuries ago and lived under military occupation that enforced strict limits on their technology development, and Jake wondered if they hoped to see something that might change the balance of power in their favor. Lieutenant Rodriguez confirmed that all safety systems were active and the firing corridor was clear of civilian traffic and space debris because a projectile traveling at 75% of light speed would not slow down or change course if it encountered something unexpected, and the destruction would be absolute and irreversible. Dr. Chen watched the energy readings climb toward maximum levels, while alien observers maintained their supposedly safe distances and assumed that human kinetic weapons followed the same physical limitations that governed their own primitive ballistic systems that barely achieved 1% of light speed, even with the most advanced propulsion technology. The moment had arrived. After decades of theoretical research and years of construction and months of testing, and Jake Sullivan stood before the firing controls, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether humanity would remain a curiosity in galactic politics, or become a force that demanded respect and fear from species that had dismissed human potential for too long. Katie Morrison looked at her commander and nodded once to indicate that all systems were ready and the railgun was prepared to fire, and Jake placed his hand on the firing control and took a deep breath before speaking the words that would change everything for every living being in the galaxy forever. The firing sequence began with a low hum that grew into a roar as the capacitor banks released 12 years of human ambition and desperation and hope, all focused into electromagnetic fields that would accelerate a simple piece of metal to speeds that alien civilizations considered physically impossible for matter to achieve without disintegrating into component atoms. Jake Sullivan watched the power readings climb on his display while alien observation ships maintained what their crews believed were safe distances and continued making jokes about human engineering limitations and primitive kinetic weapons that could barely dent the hull plating of a properly constructed starship. Katie Morrison felt the station shake around her, as magnetic coils designed by the finest human physicists channeled enough energy to power entire cities, and she knew that everything depended on the calculations being exactly right, because even the smallest error would turn their demonstration of human capability into an embarrassing failure that would confirm alien assumptions about human incompetence. The tungsten projectile waited in its firing chamber, and the simple metal rod contained no guidance systems or warheads or exotic materials. because human engineers had discovered that pure kinetic energy delivered at relativistic speeds was more devastating than any weapon system that alien military forces had ever conceived or encountered in thousands of years of interstellar warfare. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez monitored the magnetic field generators that had to align perfectly to create a corridor of pure acceleration, and she watched numbers on her screen that represented forces that could tear apart molecular bonds and reshape matter at the subatomic level. And she whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening that human mathematics was accurate enough to control such power. Dr. Alex Chen observed the energy buildup with the detached fascination of a scientist who understood that they were about to witness something unprecedented in recorded galactic history, and he knew that the aliens watching from their supposedly safe distances had no comprehension of what human desperation and ingenuity could accomplish when properly motivated by the need to survive in a hostile universe. The Zalani Empire observation ship Crystal Harmony maintained its position at what Commander Zek Tai considered a comfortable distance of 100,000 kilometers because Zalani energy shields and crystalline hull construction could easily withstand any kinetic projectile that primitive humans might be capable of launching, and his crew was already preparing reports about another failed human experiment captain. Ben Mitchell intercepted alien communications and listened to the casual dismissal in their voices as they discussed human limitations and made predictions about projectile velocities that would not exceed their own primitive ballistic weapons. And he smiled grimly, knowing that every alien in the observation fleet was about to learn that human engineering operated according to different principles. The Thurak military doctrine taught that kinetic weapons were useful only at short ranges, against unshielded targets, and General Gorthnak aboard his flagship Iron Crusher felt confident that his ship's armor plating and deflector shields would easily handle whatever the humans were preparing to throw at their test asteroid, and he was already composing his report about human technological stagnation. Dr. Amy Foster continued monitoring alien communications, and she could hear the anticipation in their voices as they prepared to witness another demonstration of human inadequacy. And she understood that their languages lacked words for the concepts they were about to observe, because no species in galactic history had ever weaponized the fundamental forces of physics to this degree. The firing chamber sealed with a soft hiss, and the tungsten projectile was now isolated in a perfect vacuum surrounded by magnetic fields that would guide and accelerate it through the 2-kilometer length of the railgun barrel, and Jake Sullivan felt the weight of human destiny pressing down on his shoulders as he prepared to fire the shot that would change everything. Katie Morrison watched her instruments as the magnetic coils reached optimal charge levels, and she knew that the next few seconds would determine whether humanity would earn respect in galactic politics or remain a species that other civilizations ignored, except when they needed cheap labor or raw materials from human-controlled systems. The target asteroid hung motionless in space exactly 150,000 kilometers from Luna Station, and the rock measured 3 kilometers in diameter and contained enough iron and nickel to build a dozen starships, and alien observers assumed that human weapons might chip off some surface material. If the projectile actually reached its target, Lieutenant Rodriguez confirmed that all safety protocols were active and the firing corridor was clear of traffic and debris, and she double-checked her calculations one final time because the mathematics of relativistic acceleration allowed no room for error, and even the smallest mistake could send their projectile careening off into deep space. The alien observation fleet included representatives from 43 different species, and most of Them had come expecting to witness another human failure that would provide entertainment for their crews and confirmation that primitive species should not be allowed to play with dangerous technologies beyond their comprehension. Dr. Chen felt the station vibrate as massive electrical currents flowed through superconducting cables, and he watched energy readings that exceeded anything human civilization had ever attempted, and he knew that they were pushing the boundaries of physics in ways that could either demonstrate human potential or destroy Luna Station in a spectacular explosion. Jake Sullivan placed his finger on the firing control and looked around at his team of engineers and scientists who had devoted their careers to this moment, and he could see the mixture of excitement and terror in their eyes, because they all understood that success would make humanity a major player in galactic politics, while failure would condemn their species to permanent irrelevance. The magnetic field generators reached perfect alignment, and Katie Morrison gave the final confirmation that all systems were ready and the railgun was prepared to fire, and Jake took a deep breath and spoke the words that would echo through galactic history as he initiated the firing sequence that would accelerate their simple tungsten projectile to 75% of light speed and demonstrate that human desperation could accomplish what alien confidence had declared impossible. The tungsten projectile erupted from the railgun muzzle in a flash of electromagnetic fury that briefly outshone the sun and created a visible distortion in space-time itself, as 50 kilograms of simple metal accelerated to 225 million meters per second and crossed the distance to the target asteroid in exactly 0.67 seconds, while alien observers watched in stunned silence as their understanding of physics crumbled before their eyes. Commander Zek Tai felt his crystalline matrix vibrate in frequencies that had no names in Zalani language as his ship's sensors registered energy readings that exceeded their maximum measurement capabilities, and he stared at displays showing numbers that his computer systems declared impossible, while his crew struggled to find words to describe what they had just witnessed. The impact site where the 3-kilometer asteroid had existed moments before now contained only expanding plasma and superheated gas that glowed brighter than most stars, and the tungsten projectile had not exploded or fragmented, but had simply transferred its kinetic energy into the target with such devastating efficiency that matter itself had been converted directly into pure energy. Jake Sullivan watched the results on his display screens and felt a mixture of pride and terror as he realized that humanity had just crossed a threshold from which there could be no return, and every alien civilization in the galaxy would now have to recalculate their relationship with the species they had dismissed as primitive tool users, barely capable of interplanetary travel. Captain Ben Mitchell monitored alien communications as panic spread through every observation ship, and he could hear the confusion and fear in their voices as they tried to process sensor readings that made no sense according to their understanding of kinetic weapons and ballistic physics, and he smiled grimly as he watched the most arrogant species in the galaxy discover that humans played by different rules. The Thurak flagship Iron Crusher had moved to what General Gorth Nak considered a safe distance, but now his tactical officer was reporting that their position would have been completely inadequate protection against whatever the humans had just fired, and his warrior culture had no words to describe a weapon that could vaporize an asteroid in less than 1 second. Amy Foster listened to the flood of alien transmissions as dozens of species tried to communicate what they had witnessed, and she realized that most of their languages lacked basic concepts for relativistic kinetics and electromagnetic acceleration, and they were having to invent new vocabulary in real time, just to describe the simple fact that humans had fired a projectile at 3/4 the speed of light. The Zilani language had 17 different words for various types of energy weapons, but no terms at all for solid matter traveling at significant fractions of light speed, and Commander Zektai found himself using mathematical equations instead of words as he tried to report the incident to his superiors, who would not believe that any species could weaponize pure kinetic energy to such a devastating degree. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez watched the sensor readings with scientific fascination as the expanding plasma cloud cooled and dispersed, and she calculated that the impact energy had been equivalent to approximately 400 gigatons of conventional explosives, but delivered in a time frame measured in microseconds rather than the minutes or hours that chemical reactions required. Katie Morrison felt the railgun system cycling down as the magnetic coils released their stored energy, and she knew that every alien observer had just watched humanity demonstrate technological capabilities that their civilizations had never conceived possible, and she wondered how long it would take for the implications to spread through galactic political networks. The Corvin scout ship Distant Hope had maintained the farthest observation position because their oppressed people could not afford to lose even a single vessel. But Captain Nelvan watched the asteroid's destruction with growing excitement as he realized that the balance of power in the galaxy might finally be shifting away from the species that had conquered and enslaved weaker civilizations. Dr. Alex Chen reviewed the sensor data and confirmed that the railgun had performed exactly according to their theoretical calculations, and the tungsten projectile had maintained structural integrity throughout its acceleration and had delivered its kinetic energy with perfect efficiency, and he felt a deep satisfaction that human mathematics had proven superior to alien assumptions about physical limitations. The Galactic Council's observation drone automatically transmitted its recordings to the Central Archives, where xenolinguists and military analysts would spend months trying to develop adequate terminology to describe what humans had accomplished, and their preliminary reports would use phrases like unprecedented kinetic energy delivery and relativistic matter acceleration that had never appeared. In official documents, Jake Sullivan received the first alien communication less than 10 minutes after the test firing, when the Zilani Empire requested immediate diplomatic contact, and their message was brief and respectful in a way that human ambassadors had never experienced before, and he realized that humanity's status in galactic politics had just undergone a fundamental transformation. The Thurak Confederation sent their own message within 20 minutes, and General Gorth-Nax's communication was even more remarkable because Thurak warrior culture had never acknowledged the military superiority of any species, but his words clearly indicated that humanity had achieved something that commanded their grudging respect and fear. Captain Mitchell continued intercepting alien transmissions, and he listened to desperate attempts by various species to understand the technology behind humanity's railgun, and their conversations revealed that most galactic civilizations had considered relativistic kinetics to be purely theoretical concepts with no practical military applications. Kerr Foster began analyzing the linguistic impact of the railgun test, and she discovered that 47 different alien languages were spontaneously developing new grammatical structures to describe kinetic weapons traveling at significant fractions of light speed, and she realized that humanity had not just fired a projectile, but had forced entire civilizations to expand their understanding of what was possible. The observation fleet began dispersing as alien commanders received urgent orders to return to their home systems and report what they had witnessed, and Jake Sullivan watched them retreat to much more respectful distances while maintaining constant communication with their governments. And he knew that every major power in the galaxy was reassessing their policies toward humanity. Lieutenant Rodriguez confirmed that the railgun systems had suffered no damage during the test firing, and all components were ready for immediate reuse, and she understood that the weapon they had just demonstrated was not an experimental prototype, but a fully operational system that could be deployed for actual combat operations. If necessary, Katie Morrison received reports that similar railgun installations were under construction at 12 other locations throughout human space, and she realized that their successful test had validated a weapons program that would fundamentally alter the strategic balance between humanity and every other species in the galaxy, and she wondered if they had just prevented a war or guaranteed one. The news of humanity's railgun test spread across the galaxy faster than the fastest starships, as quantum communication networks carried images and sensor readings that forced every major civilization to confront the uncomfortable reality that their assumptions about human technological limitations had been catastrophically wrong, and within hours emergency sessions were being called in every capital city and military command center. President Nicole Adams received her first official alien communication 6 hours after the test, when the Zalani Empire's ambassador delivered a message that was polite and respectful in ways that human diplomats had never experienced, and the crystalline being's words carried undertones of fear, as he requested urgent discussions about new arrangements between their species. Jake Sullivan found himself promoted to admiral and summoned to Earth for emergency briefings with political leaders who suddenly understood that humanity's position in galactic politics had shifted overnight from irrelevant curiosity to potential major power, and he packed his belongings knowing that his life as a simple weapons researcher had ended forever. The Galactic Council convened its first emergency session in 300 years as representatives from thousands of species tried to process the implications of relativistic kinetic weapons, and their translators worked frantically to develop new terminology in languages that had no words for the concepts they needed to discuss. Captain Ben Mitchell monitored the flood of alien communications as panic spread through military commands that had based their entire strategic doctrine on the assumption that kinetic weapons were short-range defensive systems, and he listened to desperate conversations between species that were realizing their expensive energy shields and armor plating would be useless against projectiles traveling at 3/4 the speed of light. Dr. Amy Foster published her preliminary report on the linguistic impact of the railgun test, and she documented how 47 different alien languages were being forced to develop new grammatical structures and vocabulary to describe human weapons technology, and she noted that several species were borrowing human mathematical terms because their own languages lacked adequate concepts. The Thurak Confederation sent their first diplomatic envoy to Earth within 1 week of the test, and the message they carried was unprecedented in their warrior culture's 3,000-year history because it contained a formal request for a non-aggression pact from a species that had never acknowledged military equality with any other civilization. Katie Morrison received reports from construction sites throughout human space where railgun installations were being built at accelerated schedules, and she realized that their successful demonstration had triggered a massive expansion of the weapons program that would place relativistic kinetic weapons in every major human system within 2 years. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez found herself appointed as technical advisor to the newly formed Earth Defense Command, and her first assignment was to brief political leaders who struggled to understand the mathematics behind weapons that could vaporize entire fleets in seconds, and she watched their faces change as they grasped the implications of what human engineering had accomplished. The smaller species that had been conquered or intimidated by the galaxy's major powers began sending their own messages to Earth, and these communications were different from the diplomatic overtures of established civilizations because they carried undertones of hope rather than fear. As oppressed peoples realized that the balance of power might finally be shifting, Dr. Alex Chen accepted the position of Director of Galactic Physics Exchange when alien scientists began arriving at Luna Station to study human, electromagnetic acceleration technology, and he found himself teaching concepts to beings whose civilizations were thousands of years older than humanity, but who had never conceived of weaponizing relativistic physics. The Corvan Republic sent a secret delegation to Earth 3 weeks after the Railgun test, and their representatives spoke quietly about their 3 centuries of Thurak occupation and asked careful questions about whether human weapons technology might be available to species that shared certain political objectives. Admiral Sullivan reviewed intelligence reports that showed every major alien civilization was redesigning their military doctrine to account for relativistic kinetic weapons, and he realized that humanity had not just demonstrated superior firepower, but had forced the entire galaxy to rethink the fundamental principles of space warfare. The Galactic Council's preliminary assessment classified human weapons technology as Level 12 on their development scale, and this rating required the creation of entirely new categories because no species in recorded history had ever achieved practical application of relativistic kinetics, and their xenoarchaeologists began searching ancient records for similar technological leaps. Captain Lisa Park commanded Earth's first interstellar defense vessel as it departed for the edge of Zalani space, where the Empire's leadership had requested direct negotiations with human military representatives, and she carried orders that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier when humanity was still considered a minor player in galactic affairs. Dr. Foster documented how the Railgun test had triggered the largest linguistic evolution event in galactic history, as species across the galaxy developed new terminology to describe concepts they had never needed to express, and she noted that human technical terms were being adopted wholesale by civilizations that had previously dismissed human language as primitive. The economic implications began manifesting as alien traders offered unprecedented deals for access to human systems and species that had previously imposed strict limitations on human expansion, suddenly became eager to negotiate new agreements that would ensure their continued friendship with the people who could accelerate metal rods to 3/4 the speed of light. Intelligence reports indicated that the Thurak Confederation was conducting urgent reviews of all their military installations, and Admiral Sullivan realized that a warrior culture built on conquest and intimidation was struggling to adapt to a universe where their traditional advantages had become meaningless against weapons that traveled faster than their sensors could track. President Adams met with her cabinet to discuss the flood of diplomatic requests and military intelligence briefings, and she understood that humanity was experiencing the most dramatic shift in international relations since first contact with alien civilizations, and every decision they made would determine whether their species would become a force for peace or domination. The Zalani Emperor himself requested a personal meeting with human representatives, and this invitation was remarkable because crystalline royalty had never before acknowledged the equal status of any non-Zalani being, and Ambassador Vexmore's message carried formal recognition that humanity had achieved technological superiority. In at least one critical area, Katie Morrison stood in the Luna Station control room where everything had changed 6 months earlier, and she watched construction reports showing that railgun installations were becoming operational throughout human space, and she wondered if they had saved their species from conquest or condemned the galaxy to a new kind of warfare that no civilization was prepared to survive. 1 year after the railgun test that changed everything, Admiral Jake Sullivan stood before the massive orbital defense platforms that now surrounded Earth and protected every major human system, and the electromagnetic accelerators had become symbols of humanity's transformation from galactic curiosity to military superpower. And he watched alien diplomats approach with the careful respect reserved for species that could end civilizations with simple tungsten rods. The Galactic Council had officially reclassified human weapons technology as Level 12 and created entirely new categories to describe relativistic kinetic systems, and their historical archives now contain detailed studies of humanity's unprecedented technological leap, and the term human-level physics had entered common usage across hundreds of languages as species struggled to understand how one relatively young civilization had revolutionized warfare. Dr. Alex Chen directed the Galactic Physics Exchange program from his new facility on Luna Station, where alien scientists came to study electromagnetic acceleration principles, and he found himself teaching mathematics to beings whose civilizations had conquered star systems before humans discovered agriculture, and yet they listened with the attention of students learning fundamental concepts for the first time. The linguistic impact proved as significant as the military revolution because Dr. Amy Foster's research documented how 47 different alien languages had been forced to develop new grammatical structures to describe relativistic kinetics, and her reports showed that human technical terminology was being adopted wholesale by species that had previously dismissed human language as primitive communication. Captain Ben Mitchell commanded the defense vessel Kinetic Force as it patrolled the edge of Thurak space, where the Warrior Confederation had established new protocols for approaching human-controlled systems, and their mighty battle fleets now maintained respectful distances and requested permission before entering areas where railgun platforms could reach them. The Zalani Empire had become humanity's first true ally after Emperor Zek Mori personally traveled to Earth to request assistance in redesigning their entire military doctrine, and the crystalline beings offered their most advanced energy shield technology in exchange for human guidance in understanding weapons that traveled faster than light could carry targeting information. Katie Morrison supervised the construction of railgun installations throughout human space, and her engineering teams had perfected manufacturing techniques that could produce electromagnetic accelerators in half the time required for the original Luna Station prototype, and she watched reports showing that 12 new systems would become operational every month for the next 5 years. Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez had been promoted to Director of Kinetic Weapons Research, and her team was developing smaller railgun systems that could be mounted on individual starships, and her calculations showed that even personal defense weapons based on electromagnetic acceleration principles would be more effective than the largest alien battle cannons. The smaller species that had suffered under the domination of galactic superpowers began sending delegations to Earth with requests that went beyond simple diplomatic relations, and the Corvan Republic formally asked for human military advisors to help them design defense systems that could protect their homeworld from Thurak occupation forces. President Nicole Adams found herself negotiating treaties with civilizations that had previously ignored human diplomatic overtures, and every agreement contained clauses acknowledging humanity's right to defend itself with whatever weapons technology they chose to develop. And she realized that fear had accomplished what decades of peaceful negotiation had failed to achieve. The economic transformation proved as dramatic as the political changes because alien corporations offered unprecedented technology exchanges for access to human markets and species that had previously restricted human expansion. Suddenly became eager partners in joint ventures that would ensure their continued friendship with the people who had redefined the physics of warfare. Admiral Sullivan reviewed intelligence reports showing that every major military force in the galaxy was struggling to adapt to tactical situations where traditional advantages of numbers and firepower became meaningless against weapons that could strike targets before defensive systems could respond. And he understood that humanity had not just gained military superiority, but had made conventional space warfare obsolete. Dr. Chen published his comprehensive study of electromagnetic acceleration applications, and alien physicists throughout the galaxy used his work as the foundation for their own research programs. And he noted with satisfaction that human mathematical principles were becoming the standard framework for understanding relativistic kinetics in academic institutions across dozens of star systems. The Thurak Confederation underwent the most dramatic transformation of any alien civilization, as their entire culture was forced to adapt to a universe where military conquest was no longer a viable strategy against species that possessed relativistic weapons and general. Gorthnak became the first Thurak commander in history to formally request peaceful coexistence rather than demanding tribute or submission. Captain Lisa Park returned from her diplomatic mission to the Outer Rim with reports that even the most isolated alien settlements had heard about humanity's technological breakthrough, and species that had never encountered humans before were already developing protocols for respectful interaction with the civilization that could accelerate matter to 3/4 the speed of light. The Galactic Council's final report on the Railgun incident concluded that no species in recorded history had ever achieved such a dramatic shift in military capability in such a short period of time, and their recommendation was that all member civilizations should establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity as a matter of urgent priority for galactic stability. Dr. Foster completed her analysis of the linguistic revolution triggered by human weapons technology, and her documentation showed that the term relativistic kinetics had been incorporated into over 300 alien languages, and many species were using human mathematical notation as their standard system for describing high-energy physics applications. The historical significance became clear when the Galactic Archive designated the Railgun test as the beginning of a new era in interstellar relations, and their official timeline now marked human entry into galactic politics as the moment when warfare evolved beyond conventional energy weapons and particle systems into the realm of weaponized physics. Admiral Sullivan stood in his office reading the latest diplomatic correspondence, and he smiled as he reviewed a message from the Galactic Council's Historical Division requesting permission to study human development of electromagnetic acceleration for their official records, and their stated reason was that no species had ever weaponized stellar fusion, energy equivalence, through kinetic systems. The message that pleased him most came from a small trading coalition on the galactic rim, and their representative wrote that humanity had given hope to every oppressed species in known space by proving that technological innovation could overcome the advantages of age and established power, and they thanked humans for showing that the future belonged to those who could imagine new possibilities. Katie Morrison reviewed the final construction reports. showing that railgun installations now protected every human system, and she realized that their species had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history by transforming from potential victims of alien conquest to the most feared military. Power in known space through the simple application of electromagnetic physics to kinetic acceleration.